All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm sure we're going to have some other folks log on as we go, but it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Josh Sendejar is a close partner of us here at the Meadows Center and is the coordinator for the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network, a partnership that the Meadows Center has been heavily involved in for the last, I don't know, 7 years or so since its inception. And so I'm really proud to highlight Josh's work and the work he's doing on behalf of all of us in the Hill Country. Um, Josh is an environmental professional with a background in state government, water policy, environmental education. He's extremely passionate about science communication, environmental education, and conservation in general. He strives to make an impact in everything he does, and we're so lucky that he's aimed his talents at the Texas Hill Country. So I asked Josh to come talk with us today to share with everyone some really important work that the network's been doing in the background over the last few years, focused on the natural infrastructure of our region. And so I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Josh.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you everyone for having me. Again, my name is Josh Sendejar. I'm the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network Manager with the Hill Country Alliance, and it is my pleasure to talk to you today about our latest resource, the Hill Country Land, Water, Sky, and Natural Infrastructure Plan. So I'm going to share my screen quickly. All right, you all able to see that all right?
Yes, that looks great.
All right. So again, talking about the Hill Country Land, Water, Sky, and Natural Infrastructure Plan, as part of today's presentation, I'm going to walk you through a little bit about the network, give you a little bit of a background, and then kind of launch into the nuts and bolts of the Natural Infrastructure Plan. We hope this can be a resource for planning for conservation across the Hill Country region. Again, to give you a little bit of background on the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network, the network was established formally in 2017 after a study at UT kind of looked at how many different conservation organizations were operating within the Hill Country region and how many strategic collaboration efforts were happening. After that study completed, over 250 different organizations were identified. However, there weren't so many strategic collaboration efforts that were identified within and across those partners. So the network was created to bring all of these different organizations to the table, talk about the issues that were affecting them within their region across the Hill Country, and come up with collaborative solutions to those specific issues that they were facing. So today, the network is comprised of over 50 different network partner organizations, from nonprofits to academic institutions, state entities, and more. And ultimately, the mission is to maximize the protection of the Hill Country's natural resources through enhanced collaboration. The network works through 5 different working groups. We have climate change, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, land, water, and the network just created our Night Skies working group. And so these working groups act as echo chambers to really bring up issues that are specific for those different subject areas, bubble up that discussion to the top of the network, and make decisions on, is this a place where an additional resource is needed? Is this a place where collaborative fundraising might be able to happen? Do we need additional outreach and education on a specific subject, etc.? And so some of those benefits of joining the network include that shared platform, shared messaging across those different issues and subject areas, collective fundraising opportunities, as well as collaborative strategy making for our different network partners across the region. Here we have a graphic showing the boundary area of the network, so to speak. We have an 18 county region that the network currently serves, and you can see we follow the I-35 corridor to our eastern boundary from Travis to Bexar County, all the way westward to Edwards County, as far north as San Saba, down to Uvalde and Medina counties. Within this 18 county region, we see more than 11 million acres, and roughly 4% of that is currently permanently protected. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of the Natural Infrastructure Plan, I do want to highlight the State of the Hill Country report. This report is a precursor to the Natural Infrastructure Plan. The network released it in 2022, and it covers 8 different metrics across the Hill Country relating to conservation. From population growth, that you can see that graphic there on the left-hand side, to land conserved and land developed, water resource metrics, including water consumption, water quality, and water quantity, night sky visibility, and public investment in land conservation. The State of the Hill Country report provides a foundation for the network to monitor our conservation progress across the region. And so ultimately, this is what that maximization of protection looks like, right? This is the hill country that we're all striving to keep intact, those pristine rivers, those rolling hills and scenic vistas. And increasingly, it seems this is what we're up against, is increased development that not only brings an influx of population, but also an increase in impervious cover, as well as an increased pull on our natural resources. And so to kind of look at the numbers of what we're protecting within that 18 county region, we have the headwaters of 12 different rivers, again, more than 11 million acres of land, 15 state parks and natural areas, 12 dark sky places, and about 3.9 million residents, which is projected to grow to 5.2 million residents in 2024. In addition to that, we also see over 32 million annual visitors. That, again, we have a lot to protect, and there's a lot that draws people to the hill country, but it's important to keep in mind that we need that balance between conservation and development. A couple other key statistics to mention: we lost nearly 115,000 acres to development just between 2016 and 2019. To give you kind of a frame of reference, that's equivalent to the area of New Braunfels, San Marcos, Kyle, Buda, and Georgetown combined. So to kind of get into it, what exactly is natural infrastructure? That was something that our core team kind of, I wouldn't say struggled, but had very opinionated thoughts on what natural infrastructure was. And it was kind of difficult to come to a concise definition that all of our partners could kind of agree on. And what we ultimately settled on is natural infrastructure uses, restores, or emulates natural ecological, geological, or physical processes. To put it a different way, from healthy rangeland and soils to rainwater that percolates into our aquifers to starry filled night skies overhead, natural infrastructure in the hill country is complex, and it underpins our very existence and quality of life in Central Texas and beyond. That's not to say, though, that the natural infrastructure benefits that we receive are solely environmental. There are economic, health, and social benefits to natural infrastructure, including reducing wildfire risk, connection to nature, protecting and providing clean and abundant water for our communities, as well as generating tourism and recreational dollars. To provide a different perspective, here's a graphical view of what natural infrastructure entails, as well as different ways that we as humans interact with our natural infrastructure. From wildlife viewing and hiking to night sky gazing to camping and swimming, people are connected to our natural infrastructure, and it is a vital part of our communities going forward. However, that's not to say that open spaces or preserved lands are the only places where natural infrastructure benefits are seen. Our working lands provide substantial benefit through supporting rural economies and providing ecosystem services. Now, in a state where over 90% of our land is privately owned, 83% of lands in Texas are privately owned working lands. And those working lands provide a benefit of about $629 per acre per year, according to one study from the Texas Natural Resources Institute that was released in 2022. So there's substantial benefit within these working lands, everything from flood mitigation and carbon storage to erosion control. However, just because these lands are privately owned does not mean they're not immune to some of the threats that we're seeing. Texas lost 2.2 million acres of working lands between 1997 and 2017 alone. So they're also facing some of those developmental threats that we're seeking. And with that turnover, we're seeing a decrease, substantial decrease in the amount of natural infrastructure benefits that we see. And so, why create a plan to begin with? Well, we have this iconic region with strong conservation and stewardship ethics. We have existing plans, studies, and documents that could be utilized and combined in terms of a regional document that those existing pieces of work can be referenced and utilized to provide a more holistic view of planning for natural infrastructure. We have strong support for conservation in Central Texas with over $1.4 billion in voter approved conservation since 1990. And we have more local interest in investing in conservation, which is going to require strategic action and informed support going forward. So, what does the natural infrastructure plan actually look like? Well, to kind of walk you through it, we have a shared vision, principles, goals, and definitions, collaboratively developed infographics, which you've seen some of those already, maps of potential natural infrastructure priorities, objectives and strategies for achieving the plan's vision, county level conservation and socioeconomic summaries, and a data hub to support ongoing planning and collaboration. So, to kind of get into the process of developing the natural infrastructure plan, we sent out two surveys. The first was to our network partners, asking what aspects of natural infrastructure are you most concerned with and what problems worry you the most. We had over 70 different experts and conservation professionals that we talked with in terms of that survey, and overwhelmingly with them, water was the main priority and concern. We also did a community-wide survey, people that live, work, and play within the Hill Country, and asked them something similar. What areas constitute natural infrastructure, which we got some mixed reviews for. Some people had a hard time conceptualizing certain aspects, like working lands, as natural infrastructure. And we also asked those communities, survey participants, what concerns they had regarding the Hill Country specifically. And again, resoundingly, water was the biggest impact and concern area going forward. And so the plan was informed by the people of the Hill Country with over 2,800 different survey responses, talks with not only community organizations, but conservation focused organizations. And so here you see not only the 6 conservation goals that we developed as part of the natural infrastructure plan, but also the final criteria weighting regarding those goals as it goes into our GIS analysis. And so water supply and water quality had greater than 20%, 26 and 23 respectively, going into the analysis. Climate resilience, wildlife habitat and connectivity, working lands, and access to the outdoors and nature also had those attributed values there. And so we created dozens of maps as part of our GIS analysis to highlight different features to be conserved. This map right here is a great example of one of those maps looking at a prioritization of land for water supply protection. This layer was informed by aquifer recharge and contributing zones, which is why the south and the east portion of the Edwards Aquifer doesn't necessarily show up as highly as some of those other areas. But we also looked at streams that contribute to inflows, other streams, perennial, named creeks and rivers, as well as a buffering for water intakes. A couple other of the maps that we generated included this one on the left regarding access to the outdoors and nature. This one highlights a significant equity concern, particularly around our urban areas and their ability to access natural areas. The layers within this map included open space to improve public health, preserving open space in or near low income or underserved areas, improving access of protection for areas furthest from existing public lands, and to aquatic recreation opportunities. On the right-hand side, you see a map regarding the urban heat island effect. And so urban areas particularly bear the brunt of increasing temperatures because of that lack of tree cover. And this map shows increasing temperature anomalies, particularly from that lack of cover. And so this particularly is a great example of local municipalities and communities being able to help mitigate some of those impacts that we're seeing through something like an urban forestry program. This is our night skies map. Our view of the night sky is an emerging part of the network's work. And here you can see how that view of the night sky ranges across the Hill Country region, how our urban areas are heavily impacted by light pollution, and as well as our 12 different dark sky places being marked on that map as well. Perhaps one of the most exciting parts of the natural infrastructure plan are our county by county breakdowns. These county specific maps showcase areas of high conservation priority, key demographic information, existing conservation lands, and funding for conservation. And so here between Kendall County and Uvalde counties, you can see there's much high conservation priority areas within Kendall County, but not necessarily that existing conservation land that we've seen. This is a great highlight, though, that Kendall County did just recently pass a $20 million bond, and the natural infrastructure plan can be utilized to help inform the strategic investment in conservation for the county. A little bit on the flip side is Uvalde County. Here you can see there isn't necessarily as much of the high conservation priority areas, but there is a substantial existing conservation and public land. And that is a lot of the investment from the city of San Antonio for their source water protection over the Edwards Aquifer area that provides their drinking water. Overall, some key takeaways for the natural infrastructure plan. The biggest focus and point of emphasis for many Central Texas residents is water. And so natural infrastructure and an investment in natural infrastructure is a low-cost way to protect drinking water, mitigate flooding, and increase the quality of life in the region. While we identified over 1 million acres of high priority conservation land within the context of the natural infrastructure plan, the benefits of natural infrastructure are not enjoyed equally across racial, socioeconomic, and urban and rural divides. And that's another thing that you can kind of look at within our county by county breakdowns is there is some socioeconomic information listed for those specific counties across the Hill Country. And again, action can be taken locally to reduce our footprint and increase natural infrastructure function. One other key takeaway that I want to really highlight is the support for natural infrastructure. So since 1990, there have been 39 different public funding measures in Hill Country communities and cities with a total of $1.4 billion invested in conservation. With over 2,800 survey responses, 85% of those survey respondents support increasing public funding for conservation. And we've seen that support at the state level recently, with both the Centennial Parks Fund as well as the Water for Texas Fund passing with incredible support. And again, some examples of those bond measures, we have Kendall, Hayes, as well as Travis County again this fall, re-upping its commitment to open space protections through bond measures and leading to over $1.2 billion in conservation. So what's next? In order to achieve the vision of the natural infrastructure plan, it's going to require an increased investment in conservation and a deeper understanding in the value of our natural infrastructure. So we as a conservation community are going to need to work to accelerate that investment, both or across all levels, from local and regional as well as statewide conservation efforts. We'll need to drive incentive-based policies protecting natural infrastructure, emphasize low-cost solutions to flooding, drought, habitat loss, and air quality concerns, and work with local officials to inform those efforts. We'll also need to increase equitable access to the benefits of natural infrastructure. And kind of getting toward the end of the presentation, I do want to highlight the data hub specifically. That's something that we are at this point in time reserving for not only our network partners, but also we have a terms of use agreement for any county, community, other group that is interested in this data to be utilized for their own planning efforts. And so this is a tool for conservation organizations to further plan in more detail a future where they and their natural infrastructure can thrive. The data hub houses all of the data layers, well, the vast majority of the data layers that we utilize for the natural infrastructure plan, and can be used, adjusted, and manipulated for individual needs. Users are also able to upload their own data and kind of play with those different conservation goals and layers as well. And so to just run through really quickly, this is what the Data Hub homepage kind of looks like. Here, I've brought up the overall water supply layer for the Data Hub, and you can kind of see that representation. Looks very, very similar to that initial map that I showed you earlier in the presentation. Here we have a mixture of that water supply layer as well as the overall access to outdoors and nature, and you can see how those layers play together. Ultimately, we hope that that data hub is going to be a tool for our conservation partners to be able to plan for flooding, transportation, access to the outdoors, etc. going forward. Wrapping up, I'd like to acknowledge both our consultant team as well as our funding partners. None of this work happens without the ability to be able to fund it, as well as those consultant teams providing their expertise and organizational collaboration and coordination across our different network partners. And of course, thank you to the individuals and organizations who contributed their time and effort to this specific effort and project. And that's the end of my presentation. I know I ran through that a little quickly, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to continue the the conversation.
And the conservation, right?
And the conservation, both, all in one. Oh, am I still sharing my screen or did that go?
You're not, no.
Okay, all right. Any questions, y'all?
Josh, do you want to share a little bit about what interests you've gotten so far, what kinds of uses for the map, and kind of maybe some of the surprises of the outcomes?
Sure. So in terms of what we've seen so far since the release, we've had several of our network partners utilize the natural infrastructure plan when engaging with private land stewards. And so, whether that be a conservation easement or some other form of conservation within those properties, the natural infrastructure plan and the resource and data that it provides has been able to provide some leverage with our network partners to say, here are some key areas of conservation that you are either connected to or fall within, and that is a increased need for the conservation of that particular land or that particular priority. In terms of surprises or lessons learned, one thing I'll note is part of our community survey, we set out to have our survey respondents be a representative of the demographics within the hill country itself. And that's one area where we did not see that true reflection of the hill country community. We had our Latino community specifically was underrepresented within our survey responses. And so that's an area where in the midst of the project itself, we were able to shift some resources and try and gain additional responses from that community specifically. But even with that additional resource push and an extended time frame, it was still underrepresented within our final survey results.
Yeah, I don't know if you can share a little bit about, it was a pretty robust effort, right? To try to recruit and identify local leaders that could help us engage with different kinds of communities. And even still,
Absolutely.
a full effort to provide bilingual webinars, and still we really met with
Absolutely.
some challenges, right?
Right. So we identified a couple community groups that had heavy ties and work heavily within Latino communities and asked them to partner with us in terms of getting the word out on the survey. We also held, I believe, one focus group meeting for Latino specific community members and really trying to urge and get that awareness out. Uh, and still, we did kind of fall short within that effort.
Yeah, I just, I welcome any conversation around this, but I know we are all striving to do a better job in that realm. And it was a lot of resources went into that and still really didn't hit the mark. So I wonder, anyone else? Catherine, do you want to add to that? Are any of your thoughts?
Um, oh, I see Jenna trying to jump in.
Oh, yeah,
Jenna, we can hear you.
can't hear you. Okay.
Um, yeah, let's see if we can get Jenna to chime in first.
Can you hear me? Can you
Yeah.
hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I was just curious if there was any feedback about that from the Hispanic community, about the low turnout or participation. Is there any like lessons learned that you heard afterwards from it?
I'll say from personal experience, there are a multitude of different barriers that particularly the Latino community can feel in terms of feeling they can't actively participate. And so I think one thing that we as the network saw was the need to engage more readily but more meaningfully with those partners that we have that serve and work within Latino communities. That is, like Carrie kind of alluded to, that's an ongoing effort. It's not going to be solved with one project or one specific time frame or season, but it is definitely a um, a reality check or a wake up call that in order to expect full representation, we need to be actively engaging year round, not just when we're looking
Yeah,
to have a research effort or a project, etc.
that makes
But
sense.
it's really
Thanks for
resource
sharing that.
intensive too, right? So the challenge is one of the many challenges is how do you identify resources to do that? And, sometimes these projects are the only way you can get that extra money to put the focus, but then we go away again and start over again when we come back.
I'll chime in to just add, oh, what do I want to add? I think we learned a ton of lessons in creating this report, and it was really only through the really big effort to get that representative participation that we realized just how hard it is to get that representative participation or voice from across the region. And we had a very like lengthy conversation. In fact, I remember it taking place at the Meadows Center when we kind of unveiled or like first presented on the final natural infrastructure plan. And we had a long discussion about how we could have done better, what some of those hurdles were that Josh mentioned, including at the most fundamental level, like verbiage, like getting the right words to convey. When we talk about natural infrastructure, a lot of us kind of intuitively know what it is we're talking about, but that the direct translation of some of the the stuff in the report, I feel like doesn't resonate quite as well with other communities. And so we're hearing that and really striving to internalize that and adjust and be more thoughtful about it. And I'll just say it's a journey, it's not a destination, that the network is really putting a lot of time and effort into this through the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Committee, and starting to really build and strengthen those relationships. So yeah.
And it's
There's
it's
no
big
good,
region, right? That the region, the Hill Country is a very large region, very diverse region. So it's a big challenge for sure.
yeah, and that kind of feeds into it as well, that a lot of the ramifications, both the benefits and the consequences of natural infrastructure, are felt at the local level on the block or neighborhood scale. And so when you're zooming out to create a natural infrastructure plan for a region that's more than 11 million acres, it makes it very hard to zoom in and tell some of the stories of localized flooding in the Onion Creek neighborhood, for example. So that is a real struggle that has equity ramifications, and one that we attempted to begin to address by zooming in on some of the more urban challenges around urban heat island and access to recreation and stuff like that. But I will not at all say that we hit a home run on doing that.
I would also point to the regionalization as being another challenge that we kind of recognize, as Catherine alluded to. But as a network, we're made up of organizations that have all sorts of different scopes and focuses across the Hill Country region, from statewide partners to regional to community-based partners. And so trying to mesh all of those different interests and scopes and missions into one project like the Natural Infrastructure Plan also became a challenge, because as we start to focus in, as Catherine mentioned, going from the regional scale to the block scale, some of our partners may not fully see their work being reflected at the regional scale versus that community level scale. And so how do you do justice to all of our partners and allow and create a tool that can truly be utilized from that statewide, regional to local scale was another challenge I think we faced in this report.
Well, kudos for the first attempt, and then yeah, it seems like it'll just be something that we can revise as we go and apply lessons learned. And it's a great tool and a great resource for others to do in other parts of Texas too. I was curious if you could talk a little bit about how it's going to be shared with the legislature or during the interim, and what kind of work is taking place on that end with it.
So in terms of county level elected officials, we've already seen Travis County, I believe Kendall County elected officials have also been given copies of the report, as well as a connection point to the network as a whole, and let them know we're here as a resource. In terms of the statewide effort in county Hill Country representation, I know at least Hill Country Alliance will be making a run and again letting ourselves be known as a resource going into sort of the off year, and mentioning that the Natural Infrastructure Plan as well as the State of the Hill Country report are resources that can be utilized as that conversation continues to develop. Anything you'd like to add, Catherine?
Well, no, I think that's good. We are preparing our annual visit to the Capitol, which we do every January, to kind of say hello and drop off calendars. And so this will be a resource that we include in all of our visits to legislative offices. But I would say, Jenna and everyone, that this is like all of our report. And so if you see opportunities or ideas, like if you're involved in conversations about flood funding or shaping the rollout of new federal dollars through the SRF process or any other venues that would be good to socialize this report further, we would love your help. Like let Josh know. He can work with you, either empower you to make that presentation, or we can help socialize it further. But we, HCA, certainly are not everywhere, and oftentimes we have partners who are at the legislature more than we are.
Yeah, and obviously we at the Meadows Center can't do that kind of work with the legislature, but I think the report is a great nomenclature for us to adopt. I think the use of natural infrastructure terminology is really helpful in explaining kind of ecosystem services and a lot of the benefits that all of our work collectively provides. So I love that that's sort of helping us get that into the lingo and a way to talk about those benefits, especially as the federal government sort of focuses more on infrastructure. How can we talk about green infrastructure and then in the urban environments, I think that's one of our challenges, is a lot of us in the Hill Country Network have a legacy of land conservation and sort of putting our focus on undeveloped land as infrastructure. But the reality is a lot of the Hill Country is now urbanized, and there's policy that we need to be engaging in around flooding and urban impacts to water quality. So this is kind of some new terminology for us to maybe amplify. I'm curious if anyone has any questions in general about the Hill Country Conservation Network. Doesn't have to just be about the report. For Josh. You're getting off easy, Josh. I think so.
I'll take the easy win. And
Uh-oh, Mace is coming on the camera. Oh, we can't hear you, Robert.
No question. I'm just here to wave bye if we're ending.
Nice. Well, thank you for coming, Josh and Catherine. And we're so proud to be a part of the network and everything that we're all doing together in the Hill Country. Thank you for everything you do.
Absolutely.
The feeling is mutual. Thank you guys for all your good science and water stewardship.
All right.